Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be getting into a Dany IV, A Clash of Kings, or The House of the Undying. This is by far one of the best chapters of not only A Clash of Kings, of the entire series. It is the saving grace for Daenerys in this book, because without this chapter, boy, I think we would look even worse back on Daenerys in this book, because outside of this chapter, I think the rest of her chapters are pretty to not very good. I think she has probably the worst conclusion of any character in this book in her last chapter, but this one is just a banger. I mean, the visions we see, the lore that's built, the things that even to now we haven't had paid off yet about her, about the visions she's getting or the prophecies she's being told about all these different three mounts she's gonna ride and three things she's gonna light and three betrayals. There's so much in this chapter that's so great because it recontextualizes the entire series. And so this video is going to be a hard one because, yes, it's a breakdown of the House of the Undying, but in a lot of ways it's also trying to explain everything she's seeing. So I'm going to try and do my best to not get bogged down and trying to theorize on every single little vision that she gets, but at least give you my general thoughts. I don't want this video to be an hour and a half, 2 hours long. You can speculate so much on these, so many of just a paragraph of this entire chapter could be a 10-minute video. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. I will try to cover every single thing as we're presented it, but I won't cover it as in depth as maybe I would if this was a main channel video where I'm just covering that little section of the chapter. So let's get into it, and we'll start on page 523. In Qarth, Daenerys expected the House of the Undying to be the most splendid building of all, but instead she saw a gray and ancient ruin, long and low, coiling like a stone serpent through a grove of black-barked trees with inky blue leaves used to make the shade of the evening. Very important, because shade of the evening will be a big focus of this chapter, but also later on, especially with a character like Euron. But I want to point out just the way that the House of the Undying is shown to us, the audience, and Daenerys specifically. Daenerys in this book has had a really tough time of trust and what she should trust. So, for instance, she was enamored by the splendid nature of Qarth, how richly it looked. Xaro represents the richer side of life, and trying to tempt her with those things to get her to marry him so that he can get a dragon. Where here on the opposite, Pyat Pree and the House of the Undying is kind of the opposite. It looks ugly, not as rich, but at the same time, Daenerys is looking for truth and knowledge, and this is what a lot of Qarth is. Corrupted, ugly, everything is hidden beneath the surface, and that's kind of what the House of the Undying represents in a lot of ways. No other buildings stood nearby, the roof was covered with black tiles, many broken or missing, and the mortar between stones was crumbling. We really get the feeling that the House of the Undying is this isolated building that people are not willing to really build next to because of its horrible reputation, people going into the House of the Undying and never coming out. It has an ill reputation, and for a lot of people in Qarth, is probably something you want to stay away from. Dany understood why Xaro called it the Palace of Dust, as Drogon hissed uneasily at the sight, smoke seeping between his teeth. Drogon, in a lot of ways, represents what the direwolves are for the Starks. Drogon in this chapter acts a lot like Grey Wind does when he goes to the twins, towards the Red Wedding, and Catelyn's second to last chapter specifically, and that is the way Drogon acts. And so you really see that there's that dynamic where Drogon and Daenerys are very much connected in terms of Drogon trying to warn Daenerys not to go in. Jogo then warned her in Dothraki that the place was evil, a haunt of ghosts and magi, and that it seemed to drink the morning sun. That's kind of what I think a lot of people of Qarth would be thinking. You might be thinking, if you're Qarth, why don't you remove the House of the Undying? Why don't you try to get rid of them? It's that fear of the unknown that plagues this series so much, with so many people, that how do you remove something so magical where people go in and they never come out? And that's part of it. And so if you're looking around and you're maybe some of these other people around her, like Jorah or her Cass and Aggo or Jogo, you're wondering why she's going in here at all. What is she hoping to gain from this? Truth, well, what does that mean? What truth can the House of the Undying, or the Undying specifically, give her? And especially with the ill omens here, why go in there? And that's what I would be thinking too if I wasn't Daenerys. Ser Jorah remarked on the warlocks' lack of power if they lived in such a place. Again, it goes with the idea that not everything you see is true. And so that works in the opposite here, where the Undying don't look very powerful at all, but yet we know that they hold power of showing visions and prophecies, whereas Zorro has all this richness to him, but in a lot of ways is not able to help Daenerys at all. Zorro lounging in her palanquin, calling the warlocks bitter creatures who eat dust and drink shadows, saying they have nothing to give her. Ago added that many who went in the Palace of Dust never came out, and Jogo agreed with the warning, building the ill omens of the House of the Undying. But Daenerys knows that maybe she must find this truth. There must be some reason the comet led her to Karth. What is that reason? That's what Daenerys wants to find out. As we get into page 524, Ago declared he and the other Blood Riders were sworn to live and die with Daenerys, begging to walk with her inside to keep her safe. Dany replied that some places even a cow must walk alone, as Ser Jorah offered to go with her instead, warning of the risk. Everybody's trying to talk Daenerys down, but nobody can. And that's the other part of this is, if you're Daenerys, why don't you demand that your Blood Riders or Jorah go with you? What's the harm in that? And so it really much seems like it's a setup. And if you're Daenerys, you also might be thinking, they won't let me in if I don't go alone. Even though it might be very suspicious, it just has to be the way Daenerys goes, or she cannot find this truth. Pyat Pri then appeared from under the trees and insisted she must enter alone or not at all. Pyat Pri is getting her isolated so that maybe they can capture the dragons or capture Daenerys, as she is the key to the power of magic growing in the world. Zorro urged her to turn away, tempting her with his pleasures and luxuries, but Ser Jorah reminded Dany of Mirri Maz Dur, warning her again not to trust in magic and in Pyat Pri and in the Undying. But this does the opposite. For Daenerys, all this does is reinforce why she should go into the Undying. Mirri Maz Dur knew things that nobody else seemed to know. She was able to do these blood magic rituals, and she was just a magi, so imagine what the Undying could do. That's what Daenerys is thinking, that maybe if she goes in here, she can find some knowledge into maybe how can I control my dragons or communicate with them, or how do I get to Westeros and take over. All these things are running through Daenerys' mind. Pyat Pri praises her resolve, offering his arm, and she took it, insisting that she was no child. Under the black trees, he led her away from the straight path, saying the front door led only inward, never outward. Pyat Pri warned that the house was not meant for mortals, and she must obey his instructions exactly. What's interesting, though, here is that what Pyat Pri tells her is the front door is a place where nobody ever returns from. That is crazy to think about, because how does this magic work? Because part of it, yes, you would assume is the shade of the evening, but if people aren't taking the shade of the evening and they're going in the front door, what's happening? And that's the part of this chapter that's so hard to figure out, is Daenerys is more or less being drugged, but how much of that drug is affecting the way she's seeing things, or the way that the House of the Undying works? So, for instance, when Daenerys is in, the House of the Undying, she is told to only go upstairs, but there's no towers in the House of the Undying. So that can't necessarily be physically true. It has to be either magic or Daenerys is imagining going up the stairs, but I don't think that's the case. So that's what's so interesting about the House of the Undying, and I don't think we'll ever get the true secrets of how the House of the Undying works. But there's a lot of questions that George brings up. This is by far probably the most magical chapter of the entire series. Pyat Pri then told her each time to take the door to her right. He told her if she found a stair, always climb up and never go down. He told her never to take any door but the first to her right. This is setting the conditions for how Daenerys is going to get through the House of the Undying. And what's interesting is, he's setting all these ground rules. How do these other doors work, right? Like I said, they all can't be physical doors. The House of the Undying doesn't appear to be that big. So are these other doors illusions that lock when you go into them? That's what's interesting. Or are they captured by the Undying, like how they're trying to capture Daenerys in this chapter? How does that work? Dany then repeated the rule back to him, asking if she should reverse it when leaving, but Pyat Pri firmly told her no, always the same, the right-handed door, and always up. So it seems to maybe go in a circle, you would assume. If you're always taking the right door, eventually you would maybe go in a full circle, so that by the time you got done with it, the right door would theoretically just be where you came in from. That's what I would assume, maybe. But again, it's all magical. It's not exactly logical. It's hard to look at this chapter and go, oh yeah, this is the logical way I would look at this. He warned her that she would see visions, beauty, horror, wonders, terrors, past, future, and things that never were. So more or less, she's going to see just visions. Now, some of these visions, and I want to make this very apparent here because it'll be important later, not all of these come true, or not all of these are going to come true. So when there's certain visions that we're getting, they could possibly not actually happen. That's really important to understand. He warned her that servitors might speak to her and she could answer or ignore, but she must not enter any room until the audience chamber. He told her when she reached the chamber of the Undying, she must be patient, listen closely, and remember every word. Dany promised she understood. It's interesting that Pyat Pri is saying that you can interact with these visions or whatnot, but just don't go in the room. That's the interesting part, is that these visions are so real because of the Shade of the Evening, the magic of the House of the Undying, that you can interact with them. And it isn't just limited to the door. We even see that later on, Willem Darry is going to come out of the door that he is in, showing Daenerys and her presumed House of the Red Door and Braavos. It's really interesting the way that magic works. As we get into page 525. At the entrance of the House of the Undying, Dany saw a door shaped like a tall, oval mouth set in a wall fashioned like a human face. A very small dwarf, no higher than her knee, stood on the threshold, dressed in fine livery, holding a silver tray with a crystal glass of Shade of the Evening. This is another part of this that I can't wrap my head around. So this is not meaning like a shorter person, like somebody with a disability. So for instance, Tyrion. Tyrion is somebody that has physical disadvantages. Tyrion is not this short. Like, imagine up to your knee. Daenerys is also very young at this point. She's not super tall. Like, that's like what, maybe 2 feet, something like that, maybe less than that. That's crazy to think about. So I wonder, because we don't have a lot of interactions with people like this in this world. I almost look at like something like D&D. Like D&D, you have different classes of people. So you have like a dwarf, a halfling, a gnome. This gives me almost like gnome vibes. Like they're really, really small. So very interesting. Is this maybe like a younger person? Like, could this be somebody that is similar to like Tyrion with their physical disadvantages, but they're just very young, so they're not as tall as they would be? A lot of questions I have with this, but either way, she is given the Shade of the Evening, something that is more or less a drug, something that will be given to Aeron in the Forsaken chapter. Euron uses it a lot. It has a lot of power. Pyat Pri instructed her to drink, assuring that her one drink would open her ears and eyes to the truth within, and Dany drank. It tasted foul at first, but then became every taste she had ever known, and more. The glass was soon empty. You can understand why people love the Shade of the Evening. The feeling you get of seeing all these visions of the future, or maybe even the past, but then also, being able to drink everything you ever wanted. Basically Daenerys describes it as any taste you can think of is what she tasted. It's a very interesting drink. Pyat Pri told her she could now enter, and she set the glass back on the tray before stepping inside. She entered a stone anteroom with 4 doors, remembering the instructions she took, the one to the right. And to start, all the rooms seemed to be very similar and very straightforward, going through the right-handed door, through the second, third, and the 4th room. Now, the 4th room is a bit different. It was an oval made of worm-eaten wood instead of stone, with 6 passages leading out instead of 4, as she chose the rightmost passage again. Dany found herself in a long, dim, high-ceilinged hall. Along the right wall were torches burned with smoky orange light, but the only doors were to her left. So this time, Daenerys does not have a simple answer. Just pick the door on your right. This time she'll be forced to look at some of the doors on her left that were open. Drogon spread his wings and flew briefly before crashing to the floor as Dany followed after him. The mold-eaten carpet beneath her feet showed remnants of once gorgeous colors and gold whorls. It really shows that as we've gone into the House of the Undying, we've seen very different rooms, and all of them seem to come from a much grander time. They seem worn and basically destroyed at this point. Or is that the visions that Daenerys is getting? Like, how much of what Daenerys is seeing is because of the Shade of the Evening? and how much of it is the magic of the House of the Undying, or the natural look of the House of the Undying. That's all up to interpretation. We just don't know. The carpet muffled her steps, but she still heard faint scrabbling noises in the walls, like rats. Drogon heard them too and screamed at the noise. And I don't know what this necessarily is. Is this possibly the Undying spying on her? Is this the idea of showing her visions of the past, of how people might have warged into rats to spy on things happening in King's Landing? For instance, House of the Dragon. There's a very popular theory with that with Clubfoot, or Lara Strong, I should say. So we just don't know what this is for. Maybe this is other things trying to escape that have been trapped in the House of the Undying. Very much open to interpretations, as Dany hears more disturbing sounds coming from behind some of the closed doors. As we get into page 526, one door shook and thumped as if someone were trying to break through. From another came dissonant piping that made Drogon lash his tail as Dany hurried past. Despite telling herself not to look, she peered into open rooms. Daenerys felt this overwhelming sense of curiosity. This is what she came for: truth, for visions, for prophecy. And now she's being given a little taste. Now, the first one that she gets, in my opinion, of the first opening visions is the hardest to interpret on, I think, a first read. Because what we see is a naked woman lay sprawled on the floor while four small men, very similar to the person that she got the shade of the evening from, with radish faces and pink hands sprawled over her, one coupling her and another chewing at her breasts. What I have thought this to be is more of a representation of what's happening in Westeros. Right now, what's happening is there's a War of the Five Kings. Now, there's only four. So I think this probably represents Tywin, Stannis, Balon, and then either one of the other kings, like Robb or Renly, or something along those lines. That's what I think this means. Could also mean Joffrey, I guess. Again, I included Tywin, not because he's a king, because he's the one leading like the war effort in the Riverlands. There's a lot of different ways you can go with that idea, but I think the general purpose is to say that the woman represents Westeros, like her homeland destroying her home, and then all the other like men represent the different factions that play right now in Westeros. In the next, she saw a gruesome feast of corpses. Slaughtered fetters lay in blood among broken tables, some missing limbs or heads. On a throne above them sat a dead man with the head of a wolf, wearing an iron crown and clutching a lamb leg like a scepter. His eyes followed Dany in silent appeal as she fled. This one obviously represents the Red Wedding. On your first read, you're not going to really be able to pick up on that, but it seems very apparent, especially on a reread, that's what it's saying. I will say this, though. There is more to it. Could this mean Robb is going to get resurrected with Grey Wind's head on his body, like how he is paraded around at the Red Wedding? There's some interesting stuff going on there. Could he become like a Night King type idea? There's a lot here that comes from just this little like paragraph or a couple lines. We just don't know, but I do think some great foreshadowing by George, of course, foreshadowing the big event of A Storm of Swords. The next open room was one she recognized, the Braavos house with the red door and lemon tree outside the window. Inside stood old Willem Derry, kind and wrinkled, reaching for her, calling her little princess, and telling her she was safe now. Dany longed to take his hand, and almost did, but remembered he was dead, and she ran. Now, this is the first one for Daenerys that is much more personal, where it's her longing for home, for safety, security, and she almost accepts it. It's the one thing that nearly baits her in, but she realizes that it's not the truth. The long hall stretched on with endless doors to her left and torches to her right. She ran past countless doors, wooden, iron, carved, plain locked, until she could run no more. Drogon lashed her back, urging her forward, and at last a great pair of bronze doors opened to reveal a cavernous stone hall lined with dragon skulls. On a towering barbed throne sat an old man in rich robes with long silver gray hair and dark eyes. To a man below he declared, "Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be king of ashes." Obviously, this is Aerys. Now, Daenerys isn't going to know this, of course, but we know this is an audience based on Jaime's story. This is Aerys, more or less planting the seeds of setting off wildfire, killing everybody in King's Landing, all that kind of stuff. It's another great foreshadow to what we're going to see with Jaime in the next book. And as of right now, again, you got to take so much of this chapter. And remember, when you're reading this chapter for the first time, we're only in book 2. You know, the series is still developing, it's still opening up. And when, you know, we have visions like this where we have Robert's Rebellion, Aerys, we don't know a ton about Aerys outside of from people like, you know, Ned, Robert, Daenerys, and Viserys. And so when you see visions like this, it helps fill in the gaps of what was really truly going on. Because remember, the only person that truly knows about the wildfire plan that's still alive would probably be people like Jaime and Varys. And so when you have that here, this vision happening towards the end of book 2, this really opens up your eyes like, whoa, okay, what was Aerys doing? Now, you don't know this is Aerys, but even I think if you had read this for your first time, I think that you would have started, your brain would have started churning, going, okay, this makes sense, right? Let him be the king of ashes, somebody described as a Targaryen with the silver hair and all that. It really gets your brain churning a little bit. This is a big chapter for exploring some of the things going on with the Targaryen dynasty and its fall. Drogon shrieked and clawed at her, but the king did not hear, and Dany moved on. Even Drogon sensed the unease, and maybe even that this was another Targaryen. As we get into page 527, Dany next saw a vision of a man with her brother Viserys' hair, who she thought was Viserys, but taller with indigo eyes. He called a newborn babe Aegon, saying it was the best name for a king. A woman nursing the babe asked if she would make a song for him, and the man replied, he has a song. He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. This is a huge reveal, because as an audience right now, if again you're reading this for the first time, you wouldn't necessarily know who this is. You know, once again, it's a Targaryen. If you had been paying attention up to this point and you had realized that Rhaegar had a child named Aegon, this would start, you know, getting that process going for you. Now, you would get it, you know, as we get into the next couple lines, but right away you're sitting here going, wait, the prince that was promised. He has the name of the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. Who is this child? Who is this? And what's even more interesting is he looked up, seemingly seeing Dany beyond the door, and said, there must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads. This has a lot to do with Daenerys' role in the battle with the others, the Song of Ice and Fire, and it seems to foreshadow that perfectly. But also Rhaegar saying this, that there must be one more, tells you a lot. That Rhaegar needed a 3rd child. Now, some have said that that Daenerys is Rhaegar's child just because of the look, kind of inferring that she is the 3rd child. I don't think that's the case. I think that it's supposed to signify Daenerys' role in the prophecy, and also the idea that the dragon has 3 heads and Daenerys will be one of those 3 heads. Likely the other 2 could be young Griff and Jon Snow. He then took up a harp and played as the scene faded, leaving only the music behind. This is the part where I think you would have picked up that this was Rhaegar, because Rhaegar is known for the harp and all that kind of stuff. But a really impactful scene that really changes a lot of Daenerys' plot. It's a really impactful scene. Dany walked for what felt like another hour until the long hall ended at a steep stair descending into darkness. She looked back and saw the torches going out, only 20 or 30 left, the darkness creeping towards her. I really interpret this to mean the threat of the others and her role in that the darkness, she will be the person that will have to defeat it. I think a lot of this chapter symbolizes that she is the light against the dark. She also heard something shuffling and dragging itself slowly across the carpet as Drogon screamed in response, confirming he heard it too. Fearful, Dany realized she could not go back, but the stairs went down, not up, and there was no door on the right. What was the answer to the riddle? There's no door on the right, so where must Dany go? As more torches went out, she realizes Pyat Pri's instructions. The first door on the right must mean the last door on the left. She flung herself through the door and entered another room with 4 doors. She kept turning right over and over until she was dizzy and out of breath. Finally, she stopped in another dank stone chamber, where the door opposite was round like an open mouth. Beyond it, she saw Pyat Pri standing outside beneath the trees. And he says, "Can it be that the Undying are done with you so soon?" he asked in disbelief. Another vision that Daenerys is seeing, and another test for her as well. Dany is confused by this, saying she's walked for hours and still not found them. Pyapri tries to tell her that she's lost her way and tries to guide her, but Dany hesitated. There was a door to the right, and it was still closed. And Daenerys is kind of figuring this out. She knows that this is a test. This must not be the case. The House of the Undying, or the Undying specifically, is not done with her at this point, and she's starting to see through that. Pyapri tries to tell her that isn't the way, telling her that the Undying will not wait forever, and that is not the way. But Daenerys remembers his words to her. Our little lives are no more than a flicker of a moth's wing to them, as she goes away from him into the door on the right. Pyapri tried to screech at her, but nothing happened as his face crumbled inward, changing to something pale and worm-like. Interesting. I instantly, when I read this, it reminded me of what we see possibly being in Valyria, with one of Rhaena's daughters and what she comes back with. That's what it reminded me of a little bit. Maybe that's the case. This is probably a vision, so it could be anything really. Dany left him behind, entering a stairwell. She began to climb. Before long, her legs were aching. She recalled that the House of the Undying had no towers. Like I, said earlier, this doesn't seem to make logical sense from how this building is shaped. It all seems to be magical. And at this, she reached the great ebony and weirwood doors carved with interwoven patterns. Inside, she found a magnificent hall filled with richly dressed wizards, both men and women, who claimed to be the Undying of Qarth. They welcomed her warmly, calling her Daenerys of House Targaryen, saying they had awaited her for 1,000 years and they had sent the comet to guide her. So this room is obviously meant to represent what Daenerys thinks the Undying are going to be. That they sent this comet to her and that they've been waiting for her, and they all look beautifully dressed and beautifully armored and have all this magical weapons. It's the idea of what Daenerys believes the Undying should be, and we know it's not the case. These fake Undying promise knowledge, magical weapons, and answers as they urge her to join them and sit amongst them. As we get into page 529, Dany stepped toward the false splendor of the Undying, but Drogon leapt to the top of the door and bit at the carved wood, revealing a hidden door. And Dany is almost baited in by this, but her dragon saves her again. It's very similar to the direwolves that the Stark children have. Drogon shows her the way. She fled through, Drogon returning to her shoulder, and entered a chamber of gloom. Everything that what she thought the Undying would be was not that at all. A long stone table filled the room. Above it floated a huge blue swollen heart, still beating and sending out pulses of indigo light. Blue shadows sat around the table, unmoving. Their wizened forms were violet blue, their eyes blind, their bodies decayed. They may be undying, but they are in a very sorry state. And it seems like in every single fantasy, there is some faction that really does not want to die, and they do some drastic things that lead to horrible outcomes. If you want to think about one of my favorites, my favorite is Dragon Age for video games anyway. There's literally something very similar to this. People are trying to more or less go to heaven, and they end up, not wanting to die. They turn themselves into Darkspawn, more or less. Creates a whole big issue. Lord of the Rings, you have Numenor. Their whole thing becomes they become corrupted because they don't really want to die, and they try to go to sail against Valinor, and that wipes them out completely, more or less. Not completely, but wipes out their civilization, more or less, and all that. It's a very normal trope, and it's kind of one that George is using here with the Undying. Dany sat in the empty chair at the front of the table and announced herself as Daenerys Stormborn, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, asking for counsel. At first, the Undying seemed lifeless, silent, unbreathing, but then a whisper answered, "We live, live, live." Many voices followed, echoing in the darkness, murmuring, and no, no, no. As we get into page 530, Dany asked the Undying if the visions she saw were true or lies. She wants clarification, and this is when we get some of the biggest prophecies of the entire story. The whispers reply, "The shape of shadows. Morrow's not yet made. Drink from the cup of ice and drink from the cup of fire." A lot here that we don't know. The shape of shadows, in my opinion, always seems to indicate the others and their shadowy presence and the war with them in the future. And the drink from the cup of ice and the drink from the cup of fire seem to indicate, again, that prophecy of maybe Daenerys fulfilling the role of fire. They call her Mother of Dragons, Child of Three, and chant 3 heads has the dragon. Again, we're being reminded of the 3 heads prophecy that Rhaegar was saying in the vision, and Daenerys might be all three of them with her 3 dragons, or she might be part of that. And then they give her the biggest prophecy of them all. And I'm going to break this down bit by bit, and we'll go through it as it's said. So the Undying tell her the 3 fires must you light. 1 for life, 1 for death, and 1 to love. So 1 for life would seem to indicate the dragons. She lights the funeral pyre at the end of book 1 to give life to the dragons. 1 for death could very easily be Drogo, right? He was also in the same pyre in which he was burned and he was dead. You could also say, if you want to go a different route, Mirri Maz was burned and she died. So there's kind of 2 ways you can go with that one. 1 to love could also be Drogo. Remember that she loved Drogo, and so she lights that fire to love, more or less. This could also mean something different. I've seen other people say that this could mean that more or less what's going to end up happening is she may have to be kind of sacrificed and be the light that shines to defeat the others, in a way that Jon has to sacrifice her or something along those lines. I've also seen that proposed as well. Then the next one is 3 mounts must you ride. 1 to bed, 1 to dread, and 1 to love. So far Daenerys has had a couple love interests. Now I do want to point out with the 3 mounts, we think of this logically as, okay, the 3 men she's going to be with. This also could mean Drogon, especially given the idea of the wordage of 1 to dread. You think about Balerion, the Black Dread, and then you also look at Drogon kind of looking exactly like Balerion. Not exactly, but very similar, same color scheme, all that kind of stuff. So when you look at the idea of 1 to bed, 1 to dread, 1 to love. 1 to bed could either be Daario, because the 2 seem to just have like a sexual relationship. It's not going to seem to go much further than that. This could also mean Drogo, just given the fact that Daenerys was sold to the Dothraki, and so the start of their relationship was 1 to bed. It wasn't necessarily for love. It kind of grew into love from Daenerys, but it didn't start that way. 1 to dread could either be Hizdar, or I think maybe Drogon. In terms of riding Drogon, that being her dragon she's going to ride into battle on. But just given how we describe Hizdar, she has to marry him. She takes no pleasure in having sex with him. Could easily be that one. And then 1 to love could either be Drogo, could also be Jon Snow in the future, or any other love interest that Daenerys has in the future. So that one's still a little bit, I think, up for debate. And then we get, I think, probably the most important one of the 3. 3 treasons will you know. Once for blood, once for gold, once for love. Now, the biggest problem with this one is Daenerys is likely going to be betrayed a lot. So she's already been betrayed by Mirri, which I believe was the once for blood. That would make sense to me. Blood magic was used. That makes sense. We then also know that Jorah betrays Daenerys, selling her out so that he could go home, all that kind of stuff that was going on throughout book 1. That could be the one for once for gold. But there's also a lot of debate there, because if Hizdar also is going to betray Daenerys, that he's part of the Sons of the Harpy, or whether it's the Green Grace, that could also be once for gold. Could also be Daario. Like, there's so many people. Illyrio. There's so many people that fit the idea of once for gold. That's a tough one. Now, the last one, once for love. I think the once for love one is the toughest one, because it can also go back to the idea that if Jon and Daenerys fall in love, and Jon then has to sacrifice Daenerys, that could be the once for love idea. That Jon kills Daenerys even though he loves her, and he does that to try and save humanity. I could see that being the case, but again, I think there's a lot to say there. If you guys have any other interpretations you'd like to throw out there in the comments, let me know. Visions then appear before her as Viserys is screaming as he is killed, a tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair beneath a fiery stallion banner, a burning city behind him. This is meant to represent Drogo and Daenerys' child that they never had. So this is a vision that could have come true, but didn't. I want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind, that Dany is being shown things that never happened. A dying prince with rubies flying from his chest, sinking into water, whispers a woman's name. This likely will indicate Lyanna, but I also want to point this out as well. What we're told of the story of Robert's rebellion is that Robert, hit him once, he died. This would indicate that Rhaegar was still alive after initially being hit. He was on his knees, and then Robert would have had to finish him off, which is a lot more dishonorable, not a great look. It's something I discussed a little bit in my Robert's Rebellion series on my main channel. It paints a little bit of an interesting light. Now, did this actually happen the way it's being shown to Daenerys? Still up for debate, especially coming off of the idea that she just saw a vision of her son that will never come to be. We then get the vision of a blue-eyed king who casts no shadow, raising a glowing red sword. I believe this to be Stannis, given the fact that in this book, it seems that part of Stannis' shadow and or soul, parts of him are being lost to do these shadow babies. Also, Stannis is blue-eyed, and he has a red sword. This could be foreshadowing to Stannis becoming the Night King. A cloth dragon swaying on poles before a cheering crowd. I believe this to mean young Griff when he takes King's Landing. That's what makes sense to me, and that's why I do say, like, the idea of young Griff, you can tell it was there in book 2, but it wasn't really formulated until a little bit later in the series, but you can tell it's here. Like, you can tell that, George was already thinking about, I want to do some sort of Targaryen succession issue when Daenerys gets to Westeros. This seems to have been planned very early on in the series. A great stone beast taking wing from a smoking tower, breathing shadow flame. This is an interesting one. So people have debated this one, if this is going to be related to Shireen's death and that'll awaken some sort of stone dragon or whatever. I believe that this might be one of those visions that could have happened if Stannis burned Edric. And since we don't see that happen, this vision doesn't occur. And especially when you think about where we are in the story, as of right now, Stannis hasn't lost the Blackwater yet, so this hasn't happened yet. But it could be a possible future of what is to maybe come in the series if things had gone differently. Her silver mare trotting to a dark stream beneath stars, a corpse at the prow of a ship, eyes glowing, lips gray, and smiling. I think this one, there's two ideas of which it could be. I lean mainly towards this being Jon Connington because of his grayscale and him possibly dying at some point. I also could see the idea that this could be Euron. The only thing I don't think about it being Euron is it says the lips are gray. That would not indicate Euron at all. But it is something that I kind of thought of while I was reading it, but Jon Connington is the one that comes to mind for me. We then get some huge foreshadowing to Jon's parentage, and it's been littered all throughout this chapter. Rhaegon winking to us, the audience, and Daenerys that there needs to be another child of his line. Okay, then we see directly after that, Rhaegar uttering a woman's name on the trident. Probably Lyanna. Then we see another vision of a blue flower blooming from a crack in a wall of ice, filling the air with sweetness. The flower is described to be the favorite flower of Lyanna Stark, the exact same one that Ned thinks of with Lyanna, of her like lying in a pool of blood on these flowers or whatever. That seems to represent Lyanna, and then also in the wall would seem to indicate Jon being at the wall, at being part of the Watch. That seems to be a heavy foreshadow to R+L. The whispers name her again Mother of Dragons, Daughter of Death, Slayer of Lies, and Bride of Fire. I think likely what this is meaning, let's break this down a little bit. So Mother of Dragons, obvious one. Daughter of Death, very interesting one. This could mean that maybe she is the daughter of Aerys, who is trying to do a lot of death or something along those lines. Not sure on that one. The Slayer of Lies, I think, is really going to be about the young Griff plot of him being a Blackfire and her trying to expose that and be the slayer of all the lies being told. Bride of Fire could mean that she marries Jon, representing the idea of her being fire. Or just in general that she is going to fulfill the side of the prophecy of being fire. More visions race past, shadows dancing in a tent, a barefoot girl running toward the red door house, Mirri Mazders screaming in flames as a dragon bursts from her brow. Not a lot really to say. I mean, they're pretty much on the nose. The shadows dancing in a tent is the blood ritual from book 1. The barefoot girl is Daenerys running at this red door house, maybe in Braavos, maybe in Dorne, wherever you think that is. And then the Mirri dying and the dragons being reborn, pretty on the nose. As we get into page 531, Dany saw visions of horror and prophecy, a silver horse dragging a bloody corpse, a white lion running through tall grass, naked crones kneeling, and 10,000 slaves reaching for her crying mother. So these are much more involved with Daenerys' storyline. So the first one seems to represent the person that tried to poison Daenerys in the first book, as that person is tied to the end of Daenerys' horse. The White Lion is the one that Drogo kills for Daenerys, gives her like pelt thing that she wears. The Naked Crone's kneeling is really an important one to me, because I think this represents Daenerys taking over the Khalasar in the Winds of Winter. I think this is a direct foreshadowing to Daenerys taking over the Dosh Khaleen, and having her basically become the stallion who mounts the world, her becoming the prophesized version that her son was meant to be, but now it is her. That's what I think that means. Obviously, the 10,000 slaves reaching for her crying mother, a reference to the next book when we see what happens in the slaver cities. And at this, the visions then stop. The Undying surround her, whispering as they clawed and touched her body. Cold hands and mouths are overwhelming her. She was paralyzed. Her heart stopped as they pulled at her clothes, bit at her, and sucked at her eyes. They were trying to consume Daenerys, it seems like, or absorb her power to give them more strength. Drogon intervened, tearing apart the blue heart with claws and fire. Flames engulfed the Undying, who shrieked as they burned, their bodies collapsing into ash and husks. Dany pushed through them, finding them as light as air and escaping the blazing chamber. She ran down a twisting stone corridor, its floor shifting beneath her feet, searching desperately for an exit. At last she saw a door like an open mouth and burst through it. And what she found as she stumbled into the sunlight outside was Pyat Pree waiting, gibbering and hopping frantically, as he seems shocked. Daenerys had defeated the House of the Undying and merged, something that Pyat Pree never maybe expected to be the case, as well as the House of the Undying is, well, burning down more or less. And Daenerys seems to have overcome this struggle. Now, I will say this, and this is the one issue I have with Daenerys. I mean, I have a lot of issues with Daenerys in this book. Daenerys doesn't really do anything to overcome the Undying. Like, she is clever in passing the test to get to the Undying, but then Drogon is what defeats the Undying. It has nothing to do with Daenerys. So that's one thing I don't like about this book for Daenerys. Whereas in book one, Daenerys was a character that overcame all the horrible situations she was put in. She becomes this new person of herself, and she, revives the dragons, all that kind of stuff. Book two, Drogon saves the day. She gets help from Illyrio. She doesn't really do all that much in this book, albeit this chapter is fantastic. This kind of, in a lot of ways, is exactly how I feel about Daenerys. As we get into page 532, Dany looked back and saw thin smoke seeping from cracks in the palace of dust and rising through the roof tiles. Pyat Pree, cursing, drew a knife and rushed at her. Drogon flew at Pyat's face, forcing him back. Jogo cracked his whip, knocking the knife from Pyat's hands, and Ricardo tackled Pyat to the ground. Ser Jorah knelt beside Dany in the grass and put his arm around her shoulders. This was a fantastic chapter. It's one of those things where when you read Daenerys in this book, it's one of those chapters you just dread reading. Like Daenerys 2, Daenerys 3 were not good chapters. Daenerys 1, I think, is a fine catch-up from book 1. It's a fine introduction. Dany 5, I don't enjoy all that much outside of we're introduced into Barristan, but the actual chapter itself, I think, is not a good conclusion for her storyline. This chapter is so important to Daenerys for the rest of the series. It is important for us as an audience to understand and decipher. You can read this chapter 30 times and still learn something new each and every single time. And even me, who I've read this chapter a number of times, I still have major questions that I'm not sure how I interpret things, especially the big ones, like her 3 betrayals and the 3 lights and all that stuff. There is so much to this chapter that's so awesome to read. And so if you have another interpretation, feel free to let me know down in the comments. An amazing chapter for Dany. And again, I talked about it at the beginning of the video. If Daenerys didn't have this chapter in this book, I think we would remember her as having one of the worst stretches and having like the worst book of a series, of the entire series. Because the problem with Daenerys has felt like through this book is she's so disconnected, and her character arc isn't all that interesting in this book, that this chapter does a lot to help that. It gives her a lot more of a character arc of like looking at some of these things that she's going through and how she should look at the House of the Undying, and now preparing her to think about these betrayals that she's going to have and all this stuff. And then it connects to Westeros because you're getting things like foreshadowing to the Red Wedding, of things like Stannis' plot in the next book, of maybe him becoming the Night King, of Westeros' history with Aerys and Rhaegar. This is that chapter to me that really helps Daenerys in this book, and is by far, I would probably say, I don't know where it's going to be in my ranking yet, but I would assume it's probably going to be in my top 5 of the book. So yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.